On the morning of November the 9th, 2007, the dense woods of rural McDonald County, Missouri, stood in an untouched silence. Fog clung to the branches. The air was cold, and beneath the ground, somewhere inside a narrow sinkhole known locally as Fox Cave, two deputies climbed deeper and deeper into the earth. Their boots scraped rock. Flashlights cut through darkness. 20 feet below the surface on a narrow ledge inside that sinkhole they found her. A small body. The body of a child. A discovery that would shatter a tiny town of fewer than 200 people and expose one of the most disturbing betrayals in the history of Missouri. This is the story of 9-year-old Rowan Ford, a little girl whose life was taken in a way no community could comprehend. A crime committed not by strangers in the night, but by the very people she trusted. You're watching Beyond the Case. Before we begin, remember to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button to support investigative storytelling like this. Now, let's go back to where it began. Stella, Missouri. Population, fewer than 200 residents. A place where front doors are left unlocked, neighbors know each other's routines, and the sound of a passing car is enough to bring people to their windows just to see who it might be. Tucked among quiet dirt roads and farmland sits a small home where Rowan Ford lived with her mother, Colleen, and her stepfather, David Spears. Rowan was born on April the 11th, 1998. A fourth grader who loved reading, drawing, bicycles, church, Barbie dolls, pink walls, and quiet mornings where she would wake before sunrise just to help her pastor set up for Sunday service. The pastor once said, she was always waiting on the steps with a smile, pure, innocent, early morning joy. Teachers described her as a small ray of sunshine, hard-working, shy at first, but once she opened up, the room felt brighter. Not everything in her life was perfect. She sometimes arrived at school with her hair matted or without socks in the freezing Missouri winter. But she tried always. Rowan was the kind of child who fought through difficulty with a smile. But none of the adults in her world could have predicted that early in November 2007, she would vanish without a trace. It was Saturday, November the 3rd, 2007. A night like any other in Stella. Rowan's mother, Colleen, worked the overnight shift at Walmart. Her stepfather, 25-year-old David Spears, was supposed to be at home with Rowan. But according to him, Rowan had been asleep on her bedroom floor when he left the house to go drinking with two friends, Nathan and Christopher Collings. What happened next would be retold in multiple contradictory versions. Versions that changed every time David opened his mouth. At first, he claimed he only left once. Then he admitted he left again at 1:30 in the morning. Then he said he borrowed his mother's vehicle. Then he said he did not check on Rowan at all when he returned. Investigators would later describe him as uncooperative, dishonest, and highly suspicious. But at this moment on that early November morning, none of that mattered yet. Because when Colleen returned home from work, Rowan was gone. David told her, casually, that Rowan must have gone to a friend's house. He could not say which friend. He could not offer a phone number. He could not explain why a 9-year-old girl would leave the house alone in the middle of the night. Colleen wanted to call police immediately. David refused. Hours passed. No phone call came. No friend appeared. No explanation arrived. By the time Rowan was officially reported missing at 6:50 that evening, she had already been gone for many, many hours. Time was not on her side. Within minutes, an Amber Alert was issued. The entire community of Stella mobilized. Neighbors who had known Rowan since birth left their homes and searched fields, barns, and wooded areas. Officers from multiple counties converged on the small town. The FBI arrived the next day. Dozens of officers, helicopters, search dogs, volunteers, but no Rowan. In missing child cases, investigators immediately ask 3 questions. Where was the child last seen? Who was with them? Who had access to them? For Rowan Ford, the answer to all 3 questions pointed to one place. One home. One man. Her stepfather, David Spears. But something else was about to complicate the investigation. There was another man in Rowan's life, a man she trusted deeply. A man she called Uncle Chris. Christopher Collings, age 32, a longtime friend of David's. A man who had lived in their basement earlier that year. A man who helped Rowan with her homework. A man who had 3 children of his own. A man described by police as cooperative and concerned. He went drinking with David the night Rowan vanished. He spoke to officers voluntarily. He even offered to wear a wire to help catch anyone responsible. On the surface, he appeared helpful, too helpful. And there was something else. When investigators asked him about the night of November the 2nd, he recited his timeline perfectly, almost too perfectly, like a script rehearsed again and again. Still, the FBI took him at his word. For now, in the days following Rowan's disappearance, rumors spread quietly through Stella. People whispered, mother to mother, neighbor to neighbor, church to church. Something was wrong. Teachers remembered Rowan's last day at school. Her hair had needed brushing. One teacher spent half an hour doing it for her. Later that day, Rowan skipped past her with a smile, perfectly happy. No one could imagine she would be gone the very next day. The community prayed, searched, lit candles, called her name. But with each passing hour, hope dimmed. And as hope dimmed, suspicion grew. Suspicion around David Spears. Suspicion around his changing stories. Suspicion around the fact that he waited nearly 10 hours to report his stepdaughter missing. But the suspicion around Christopher was different. People trusted him. People liked him. And for officers, that made him more dangerous than David. Because sometimes, the person you trust the most is the one hiding the darkest secret. By November the 6th, 3 days after Rowan was reported missing, Christopher was cracking. He showed up repeatedly at the police station. He visited Rowan's mother. He told his friend, Police Chief Clinton Clark, that he was upset, confused, and overwhelmed. Chief Clark had known Christopher for 17 years. He said Christopher looked apprehensive, nervous, and unlike himself. When the FBI interviewed him again, he became emotional. He said he wouldn't talk if they were accusing him of harming Rowan. Then he left, panicked. The next day, he agreed to give DNA. He allowed officers to search his home, his trailer, and a safe kept in David's house. He grew more agitated. He told Chief Clark, "If I have anything else to say, I'll talk to you." And the FBI believed he was near confessing. But they needed something more. They needed a body. On November the 8th, investigators had David wired quietly, recording everything he said. They followed him as he searched for Rowan with coroner Mark Bridges. When asked to imagine what Christopher might have done, David led Bridges to a place he called the hole in the ground, Fox Cave, a sinkhole disguised by brush and forest undergrowth. Bridges found items at the scene that made him uneasy. He informed the FBI. They informed McDonald County. And early the next morning, Friday, November the 9th, deputies descended into the darkness of Fox Cave. They found her immediately, a small, lifeless child on a ledge 20 feet below the earth. Rowan Ford had been found, and the story the community hoped would end with a miracle became a nightmare in daylight. When the news broke that Rowan's body had been found, the town of Stella seemed to hold its breath. The search was over. The hope was gone. And for investigators, a chilling reality emerged. Someone who lived among them, someone they knew, someone Rowan trusted, had murdered a 9-year-old child. As reporters gathered near the wooded area around Fox Cave, officers scrambled to secure the site. A crime scene team descended into the sinkhole, documenting every inch of the rocky ledge where Rowan's body had been discovered. The FBI and county deputies worked quietly, methodically. There was no room for emotion. Not here, not now. Every investigator knew that the next phase would determine everything. They had a body. Now they needed the truth. And the truth, they believed, was hiding inside one man, Christopher Collings. Shortly after news spread through the county, Chief Clinton Clark received calls from his office. Christopher was here. He wants to talk. Clark immediately alerted the FBI. They told him, "Find him. Tell him we recovered Rowan's body." But Christopher was nowhere in sight. Minutes later, Clark's phone rang. It was Christopher. His voice was unsteady, paranoid, trembling. He asked Clark, "Are law enforcement following me in a gray minivan?" Clark, confused, told him he didn't know anything about surveillance, but Christopher insisted he was being trailed. He said he'd been driving erratically across the county, trying to shake off whoever he believed was behind him. Fear, guilt, pressure. It was clear. He was unraveling. Clark told him to meet at the police station, but Christopher refused. He wanted to meet Clark alone. They agreed on a location, and that was where everything began to fall apart. The two men met on a quiet stretch of road. Clark drove him to the police station, but Christopher hesitated when they approached the building. He didn't want to go inside. He didn't want people around. He was holding something inside, like a dam on the verge of bursting. Clark could see it, the trembling hands, the tight jaw, the eyes that refused to meet his. So Clark drove them to a secluded rural spot, Muni Bridge, a place only locals knew. The air was cold, the scenery empty. They stepped out of the car. Christopher turned to him and held out his hands. "Go ahead and cuff me." Clark refused. "Why would I do that?" Christopher swallowed hard. "For what I'm about to tell you, you'll need them." The silence that followed was painful, stretching across the cold November air like a held breath. Clark looked at him, really looked at him. And then he asked the question he had asked before. "Chris, what happened to Rowan?" This time, Christopher didn't turn away. This time, he broke. He told Clark the same story he had told all week, up to a point. He said he left his trailer with David and Nathan. He said they used the back roads. He said he returned home before midnight. Then he paused. The truth, when it finally came out slowly. It came out piece by piece, and the story changed, dramatically. "After Nathan dropped us off, I knew I could get there fast if I took the highway." Clark listened quietly. Christopher continued. He described how he drove to Rowan's home, how he slipped inside without speaking, afraid she'd recognize his voice, how he saw the 9-year-old sleeping on the floor, how he picked her up, carried her outside, placed her into his truck. He paused again, tears welling. "I took her back to my trailer." His voice cracked. "I didn't speak. I didn't want her to know it was me." Clark felt a wave of nausea hit him. Christopher's next words were worse. "I assaulted her." The chief felt his stomach drop. His breath caught. It took every ounce of control not to react. Then Christopher said something that chilled Clark more than everything else. "When I was walking her back to the truck to take her home, she looked over her shoulder. Gelder, she looked over her shoulder." He hesitated. "She saw my face. She recognized him. Someone she trusted. Someone she liked. Someone she thought was safe." That moment, according to Christopher, shattered something inside him. "I freaked out." He described how he grabbed a rope from a pickup truck near the trailer, how he wrapped it around her neck, how he strangled her, how her body went limp, and how he realized, with horror, she's gone. She's really gone. The cold November air felt even colder now. Clark's chest tightened as Christopher continued. He said he put her body in the bed of his truck. He said he thought about dumping her off Mooney Bridge, but he was afraid she'd be found too quickly. So he drove until he reached Fox Cave. "I threw her in. I tried to cover the entrance, but it was too big." The confession was not just horrifying. It was devastating, because until that moment, investigators believed David Spears, the stepfather, had killed Rowan, and Christopher only knew something about it. But this changed everything. The way Christopher described destroying evidence was disturbingly calm. He said when he got home there was blood on the sheets, blood on his clothes, blood on parts of the trailer. So he burned her pajama bottoms, burned her underwear, burned the rope, burned his clothes, all in a wood stove. He rolled up the mattress still stained and shoved it into a metal drum. But he realized burning it outside would attract attention. Someone would see the flames. Someone would smell it. So he dragged the drum to a barn, and there he set it on fire. He said he cried like a baby all afternoon. He said he regretted everything. He said he didn't know why he did it. But the truth was simpler. He killed her because she recognized him, because she trusted him, because she called him Uncle Chris, and because at the moment she needed him most, he became her worst nightmare. After the confession, Clark drove Christopher back to the police department. Christopher repeated everything on audio, then again on video, then again for deputies from Berry and Newton County. He was emotional, cooperative, broken. Investigators believed the case was complete. But then, stepfather David Spears was brought in again, and he told a different story, a story that changed the case once more. David said that when he returned home and could not find Rowan, he went to Christopher's trailer. He claimed he walked in and found Christopher assaulting Rowan. He claimed he joined him. He claimed they both raped her. And then, he claimed they both killed her. David said Christopher handed him the rope. David said he strangled Rowan. He said, "I choke her with it. I realize she's gone. She's really gone." Two men, two confessions, two entirely different stories, both admitting to being involved. But one swore the other was innocent, and the other swore they were guilty together. For investigators, the truth was tangled, conflicted, contradictory. But one fact was clear. Rowan had been betrayed by not one, but possibly two men she knew, two men she trusted, and at least one of them had taken her life. The autopsy revealed three devastating things. Rowan had been sexually assaulted. She had been strangled. She had suffered facial injuries consistent with being thrown into the sinkhole. The examiner also noted signs of decomposition and bruising inflicted before her death. It was enough to charge both men, but the question remained, who actually killed her? Was David lying to reduce his own guilt? Was Christopher protecting David? Or were they both telling fragments of the truth? Investigators could not be sure, but the prosecutor had enough to move forward. Both were charged with statutory rape, forcible rape, and first-degree murder crash. Beck dime. And in this cold, quiet Missouri town, justice was just beginning. The discovery of Rowan's body did more than break hearts. It fractured an entire community. Stella was too small for secrets, too small for lies, too small for a crime like this to remain quiet or distant. For residents, every person became a suspect. Every handshake felt dangerous, and every memory of Rowan became a painful reminder of what was taken. Parents held their children closer. Teachers broke down during staff meetings. Pastors struggled to find words for their congregations. Grief hit this tiny town like a wave, and beneath it, a deeper feeling grew. Betrayal, because the monsters responsible were not strangers. They were not outsiders. They were not nameless predators wandering through Missouri's countryside. They were men who lived here, men who attended the same gatherings, shopped at the same stores, shared meals with the same families. Two men who were welcomed in Rowan's home. Two men she trusted. Two men she called by name. And that was the deepest wound of all. The confessions from both men, Christopher and David, created a legal storm. Two different stories. Two different killers. Two different accounts of the final moments of a 9-year-old girl's life. Investigators sat in a small room, replaying both statements. They charted timelines, compared body language, and looked for discrepancies. But the truth wasn't simple, because both men had reasons to lie. David had every reason to minimize his guilt. Christopher had every reason to take all of it. And the forensic evidence, while strong in proving assault and homicide, did not clearly indicate who had placed the rope around Rowan's neck. The prosecutor faced a brutal question. Who killed Rowan Ford? The answer could mean the difference between life and death, or between one killer and two. When David was questioned again, officers watched him carefully. He was nervous, fidgety, inconsistent. His story changed constantly. She was at a friend's house. He only left once. He left twice. He borrowed his mother's SUV. He didn't. He checked on her. He didn't. He saw Christopher hurting her. He joined in. He killed her. He didn't kill her. Every sentence contradicted the last. The sheriff later said, "We caught him in lie after lie. Nothing he said made sense." But one thing stood out. When investigators confronted him with Christopher's confession, including the claim that David had no involvement, David didn't show relief. He didn't deny his earlier statements. Instead, he grew more agitated, more defensive, more confused, like a man desperate to find a version of the story where he didn't claim full responsibility, a version where he wasn't the sole killer, a version where maybe, just maybe, he could avoid the death penalty. Christopher, on the other hand, was calm. He repeated his story again and again. "I acted alone." He defended David, said David had nothing to do with the assault, nothing to do with the murder, nothing to do with disposing of the body. He even emphasized, David never touched her, not once. Investigators didn't understand it. Why protect him? Why take all the blame? Why confess in full? Some officers believed he felt genuine guilt. Others believed he feared roping David in would make his own sentence worse. And some believed the simplest explanation. Christopher was telling the truth. But in true crime, the simplest explanation is not always the right one. Still, investigators noticed something important. Whenever the conversation turned to Rowan, the girl he used to help with homework, Christopher broke down. Whenever they mentioned David, he remained steady. It was clear. This crime had eaten him alive. And now, it was eating the entire town with him. By mid-November, the prosecutor had no choice. With 2 separate confessions and no conclusive evidence pointing to just one killer, the state filed charges against both men. Each man was charged with first-degree murder, statutory rape, forcible rape, charges that guaranteed one outcome, a potential death sentence. The courtroom was filled with somber faces the day the charges were read. Reporters scribbled notes. Family members cried quietly. Colleen, Rowan's mother, sat silently as the men responsible for her daughter's death were brought forward. For her, this was not justice. This was only the beginning of a nightmare that would never truly end. The defense teams for both men sprang into action. For David, his attorneys argued that he was manipulated into confessing, that sleep deprivation, interrogations, and fear broke him. They claimed he lied in panic, trying to fit what officers wanted to hear. For Christopher, his lawyers acknowledged his confession, but they argued it was shaped by coercive pressure too. They insisted that the true events were complex and that the investigation had prematurely concluded guilt. Both sides began building strategies. Both sides prepped for a brutal courtroom battle. But prosecutors had one thing neither defense team could deny: a dead child. And the man who admitted to kidnapping her, raping her, and throwing her into a hole in the ground. But legally, it wasn't enough. Not in a case with conflicting confessions. Not with death sentences on the line. Which meant one thing: the trials would be long, complicated, and intense. As legal proceedings dragged on, the community's grief hardened into something sharper: anger. People who once exchanged friendly waves at the post office now stared at each other with suspicion. Families avoided public spaces. Parents who once let their children roam freely now watched them every second. Rowan's story spread beyond Stella. Missouri news outlets covered it relentlessly. Soon, national media picked it up. And with each new article, each new headline, the pressure grew. The question arose in every household: how could 2 grown men do this to a child? People felt unsafe, violated, sickened. And more than anything, they wanted someone to blame. Whether that person was David, Christopher, or both didn't matter. The town wanted justice. They wanted retribution. They wanted closure. But closure rarely comes cleanly. And in this case, it wouldn't come at all. In cases like this, the autopsy becomes the anchor. Investigators studied bruising, DNA samples, the condition of her body, the injuries consistent with strangulation, the timeline of decomposition, footprints, and disturbances within the cave. burned materials recovered from the barn, residue consistent with rope fibers have listened. But the key detail haunting the prosecution was this: there was no forensic certainty about who placed the rope around her neck. Both men had DNA present in different locations. Both had access. Both had motive opportunities. Both confessed. But confessions alone, especially contradictory ones, are fragile evidence in a death penalty case. For jurors, these conflicting narratives could inspire doubt. And doubt meant potential acquittal. So the state prepared for a war of words, evidence, timelines, and credibility. This was no longer just a tragedy. It was a legal chess game. One where the prosecution had the burden of proving the unthinkable: that one or both of these men murdered a 9-year-old girl, and that they deserved to die for it. Just when investigators believed they had enough to proceed with 2 trials, something unexpected happened. Christopher began cooperating again. He agreed to walk the FBI through his version of events step by step. He explained where he picked Rowan up, where he parked his truck, where he committed the assault, where he strangled her, where he burned the evidence, where he rolled the mattress, and exactly how he dropped her body into the cave. He insisted again. I acted alone. He refused to let investigators put any of the burden on David. Despite knowing full well that taking sole responsibility could seal his fate. But why? Why protect a man accused of raping and murdering a child? Some believed he was guilt-ridden and wanted to spare another man's life. Some believed he simply wanted to control the narrative. Others believed he feared David and was covering for him out of manipulation, trauma, or misguided loyalty. But one truth became clear. Whatever happened in that trailer, it was far from simple. And the courts were about to dig deeper, much deeper. The state separated the cases. 2 trials, 2 defendants, 2 possible death sentences. The courtroom would soon become the stage for one of Missouri's darkest criminal prosecutions. Christopher would face his jury first. David would follow. But before the first gavel struck, something happened that no one expected. Something that reshaped the entire case. Something that made the truth even harder to untangle. As prosecutors prepared for trial, the legal teams for both defendants worked overtime, digging through every statement, every timeline, every discrepancy. But it was during an exhaustive review of the interrogation tapes that something alarming surfaced. David Spears's confession contained inconsistencies not just in the storyline, but in the language itself. He used phrasing that sounded almost rehearsed. He described details he couldn't possibly know unless fed or influenced. He contradicted himself repeatedly, and the tone of his voice shifted depending on who was in the room. Defense attorneys argued. David was scared. David was confused. David was manipulated. David was not capable of organizing such a crime. But the prosecution countered. He left a 9-year-old child home alone in the middle of the night. He lied for hours. He delayed reporting her missing. He hid his movements. He changed his story with every interview. Both narratives held pieces of truth. Both narratives held pieces of deception. This case was no longer just about what happened. It was about who to believe. Who lied the most? Who lied first? Who lied last? The answers would determine the fate of 2 men, and the justice owed to a little girl. The state made its strategic move. Separate the trials. Try Christopher first, then move to David. This decision was deliberate. Christopher's confession was stronger. Christopher's timeline was more coherent. Christopher had placed himself at the scene repeatedly. In the eyes of prosecutors, he was the anchor. He was the primary culprit. He was the one they believed they could convict beyond all doubt. But with death on the table, every word mattered. Every detail would be contested. Every inconsistency magnified. Witness lists grew. Experts were summoned. Forensic specialists reviewed evidence from the cave, the trailer, the barn, and the vehicles. The courtroom preparations became a war room operation. And beneath the surface, both legal teams knew. This trial wouldn't just determine guilt, it would determine whether a man lived or died. The trial of Christopher Collings began inside a packed Missouri courtroom. Family members of Rowan filled the benches. Reporters lined the rows. Community members gathered outside the courthouse, some holding candles, others holding signs demanding justice. The air smelled of anger, grief, and anticipation. The judge entered. The jury filed in. And slowly, the story of Rowan Ford's final hours began unfolding. This time, under the bright spotlight of the law. The prosecution opened with a theme that echoed like thunder. She trusted him. They described Rowan as a shy, bright 9-year-old girl who looked up to Christopher, who called him Uncle Chris, who saw him as family. And then they laid out the evidence. His confession, his detailed timeline, his knowledge of the cave, the burned evidence, his behavior before and after her disappearance, his emotional unraveling batter, his own admission of guilt spoken multiple times to multiple officers. Their strategy was simple. Let Christopher convict himself. And for the most part, he did. But Christopher's lawyers weren't there to surrender. They attacked the confession. He was coerced. He was unstable. He was emotionally collapsing. He spoke under pressure, fear, and exhaustion. They brought forward experts who testified that confessions, especially in emotionally charged cases, can be influenced by suggestion, stress, or desire for closure. They highlighted that Christopher repeatedly protected David. They pointed out, if Christopher acted alone, why did David confess too? Lake's friend. This question became the defense's most powerful weapon. 2 confessions, 2 different stories. Which one was real? Could the state truly prove beyond reasonable doubt that Christopher strangled Rowan? The defense wanted the jury to hesitate, even for a second, because hesitation meant doubt, and doubt meant life instead of death. Next came the forensic testimony. A series of experts walked the jury through the scientific facts. Rowan died from strangulation. She was sexually assaulted. Her injuries were consistent with being thrown into the cave. The timeline supported Christopher's version. Burn patterns matched an attempt to destroy evidence. Items found on the property aligned with his story. But even here, the prosecution faced an obstacle. Forensic science could identify the what and the how, but not the who, not definitively. And in a case involving the death penalty, that gap mattered. Still, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming, and the emotional weight of the crime was impossible to ignore. In a risky move, Christopher took the stand. He spoke softly. He looked exhausted. He described the night of November the 2nd in haunting detail. He repeated the same story he told Chief Clark, deputies, and the FBI. I acted alone. He admitted to taking Rowan from her home, assaulting her friend, strangling her, burning evidence, dumping her body in Fox Cave. His voice cracked only once when describing the moment Rowan recognized him. She turned around, she looked at me, and I lost it. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. The jurors watched him. Some leaned forward, some turned away, some wiped tears. And in that silence, one thing became clear. Christopher wasn't trying to save himself. He wasn't trying to shift blame. He wasn't trying to rewrite the narrative. He was accepting it. Every word, every act, every consequence. After days of testimony, hours of closing arguments, and a night of deliberation, the jury returned. The room fell silent as the foreman stood. The judge asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman's voice was steady. "Yes, Your Honor." He handed over the papers. The judge unfolded the sheet, adjusted his glasses, and read, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Christopher J. Collings, guilty of first-degree murder." A ripple of emotion swept across the room. Some sobbed, some nodded, some closed their eyes. The judge continued, "Guilty of forcible rape, guilty of statutory rape." 3 verdicts, 3 guilty findings. The courtroom exhaled. Justice had begun. The sentencing phase was brutal. Rowan's family gave statements heartbreaking, raw expressions of grief. Investigators described the scene at Fox Cave. The prosecutor argued that no punishment short of death could match the cruelty of the crime. The defense pleaded for mercy. They spoke of Christopher's troubled past, his emotional instability, his remorse. But the decision belonged to the jury. After hours of deliberation, they returned. The judge's voice was unwavering as he read their recommendation. The defendant shall be sentenced to death. A heavy stillness settled over the courtroom. Christopher did not react. He did not cry. He did not speak. He simply lowered his head. A man who once lived in a friend's basement now stared down the reality of death row. With Christopher sentenced, the state turned its focus to David. But his case was different, more fragile, more complicated. David's confession was inconsistent. David's timeline was flawed. David's mental capacity was questioned. But the prosecution pushed forward. At his trial, they argued, David left Rowan alone. David lied repeatedly. David failed to protect her. David may have participated in her assault, and David may have participated in her murder. The defense retaliated. No forensic evidence tied David to the killing. No physical proof placed him at the trailer. No DNA supported his involvement. His story was manipulated and twisted. He was scared and confused. The prosecution's strongest weapon, the dual confessions, had now become its greatest weakness. Christopher insisted David was innocent. David insisted Christopher was guilty. Neither account matched the other. And then, the defense dropped its final blow. Christopher already admitted to acting alone. Why would he protect the man who accused him? It was a question the prosecution struggled to answer. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. The charges against David were steep. They carried the possibility of death. But when the verdict was read, it changed everything. David was convicted of lesser charges connected to the crime, but not first-degree murder. The evidence, they concluded, was not strong enough to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he physically committed the rape or the murder. David received a severe prison sentence for his role, but he was spared the death penalty. The courtroom was stunned. Some felt justice had prevailed. Others felt justice had slipped through their fingers. But for Rowan's family, no sentence felt like enough. With both trials concluded, Stella tried to return to normal life. But normal no longer existed. Rowan's church placed a small plaque in her memory. Her school planted a tree in her honor. Her teachers cried for weeks. Neighbors avoided conversations. Still unable to process the betrayal, Colleen tried to rebuild her life, haunted by the memory of her daughter skipping down hallways and brushing her hair into ponytails. Investigators closed their files. Officers moved on to other cases. But none of them forgot Rowan. And in the quiet Missouri woods, Fox Cave remained unchanged. Dark, cold, silent. A reminder of a crime the community wished they could forget. With both trials concluded, Stella was left in a strange, painful quiet. The media vans disappeared. The reporters moved on. The courtroom lights dimmed. But the damage remained. News articles stopped. Cameras faded. America shifted its attention to something else. But the families of Rowan, Christopher, and David did not have that luxury. For them, this story was not a headline, not a broadcast, not a case file. It was their lives, their blood, their town, and the aftermath would be felt for years. After sentencing, Christopher was transferred to the maximum security prison facility where Missouri houses death row inmates. The first few weeks were marked by silence. No visitors, no interviews, no statements. He remained alone in his cell, the same man who once lived in the basement of a friend's home, now living in the cold isolation of concrete walls and steel bars. Psychologists who evaluated him described him as detached, emotionally exhausted, mentally fragmented, a man who accepted his fate. But deep beneath the surface, something else existed. Remorse, not expressed publicly, not shown to the media, not proclaimed in court, but observed privately during interviews, psychiatric sessions, and periods of reflection. He spoke several times about Rowan, how she trusted him, how she didn't deserve what happened, how he ruined everything. But remorse, no matter how sincere, could never bring her back. And nothing could undo what he did. David's fate was different. He avoided the death penalty, But he did not escape consequences. His sentence, though not equal to Christopher's, ensured he would spend decades behind bars. Correctional officers reported he kept to himself. He avoided conflict. He did not discuss the case. He did not talk about Rowan. He did not speak of Christopher. He lived in the shadows of the prison system. A man many believed played a role, even if the courts did not convict him of murder. And this belief created a weight he could never fully escape. Other inmates despised men who harmed children. Rumors spread quickly. And though he was not convicted of murder or rape, the stigma followed him everywhere. He became a ghost in the hallways, quiet, withdrawn, a man who faded into the background of prison life. Some believe he was hiding from guilt. Others believe he was hiding from the truth. But the truth was simple. Whatever his involvement, he failed Rowan, failed to protect her, failed to act, and for that, society would never forgive him. Death penalty cases trigger automatic appeals. Christopher's lawyers filed challenges on the admissibility of statements, the interrogation conditions, the influence of emotional testimony, the use of confession as primary evidence. The jury's interpretation of forensic findings is life, but each appeal failed. Judges repeatedly ruled, the evidence is overwhelming. The confession was voluntary. The conviction stands. He remained on death row. David filed appeals too. Is a distalve. The validity of his confession velas. The inconsistencies in investigative procedure brines. The perceived pressure from officers Missouri. Some appeals adjusted parts of his sentencing, but none overturned it. Both men remained exactly where the state believed they belonged. For Rowan's mother, Colleen, life became a quiet ache. She continued working. She continued surviving. She continued breathing. But every morning, every shift, every holiday, every quiet night in the house where Rowan once lived was a reminder of what was stolen. Her daughter's drawings still hung on the walls. Her pink bedroom stayed untouched. Her toys remained in their places. Her handwriting preserved on old-school assignments. People told Colleen she was strong, but strength was not what kept her going. It was memory, pain, love, and the refusal to let Rowan's story fade into silence. In a town as small as Stella, healing comes slowly. Schools held assemblies about safety. Churches held prayer services. Teachers underwent special training. The playground Rowan once played on became a place of quiet mourning. Some families moved away. Others refused to leave. Some businesses closed. Others stayed open but never regained their old warmth. The community carried a collective wound, one that reopened every time Rowan's name was mentioned. Every time a child disappeared in America, every time a similar case aired on television, Stella was never the same again. Because tragedies like this don't just affect the victim's family, they infect the entire town. A reminder that evil can live anywhere, even in a place with fewer than 200 people. Rowan's memory did not fade. Her school planted a tree in her honor, a small flowering tree that blooms every spring. Her church held an annual candlelight vigil. Neighbors placed pink ribbons around town. Teachers kept her artwork preserved in storage. Stories about her continued to circulate, not about her death, but about her life. How she always smiled. How she helped her pastor. How she tried so hard in class even when subjects were difficult. How she skipped instead of walked. How she lit up rooms, and slowly, painfully, beautifully. Her legacy became more than the crime. It became a reminder of innocence, of kindness, of the importance of protecting children, of what a community must stand for. The Rowan Ford case became a cornerstone in Missouri law enforcement training. A case study on the danger of dual confessions, the complexity of child homicide investigations, the psychological unraveling of offenders of distant, the pain inflicted on rural communities, the need for rapid, accurate timelines, the unpredictability of those closest to victims asked her. But the case also revealed a chilling truth. Evil does not always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears the face of someone you trust, someone who helps with homework, someone who babysits, someone who jokes with neighbors, someone who sits at your dinner table. That, investigators said, was the hardest part. Not the sinkhole, not the forensics, not the interrogations, but the betrayal. Because Rowan knew these men, and they knew her. Years later, branches grew over Fox Cave. Grass reclaimed the soil. Animals crossed the path without hesitation. Nature forgets. People do not. The cave became a scar on the landscape, a reminder of a crime hidden beneath the earth. Investigators closed their files. Officers retired. New deputies filled their places. But those who worked the case never forgot the moment the body was found on that ledge, 20 feet below the surface. They never forgot the weight of carrying her out of the darkness. They never forgot the silence in the woods that morning. And they never forgot the face of the little girl whose life was stolen. Evil doesn't always arrive with warning. Sometimes it grows quietly, in the shadows of familiar places. In rural towns, in small homes, in the spaces between trust and betrayal. Rowan Ford was a child with her whole life ahead of her, a fourth grader who loved dolls, church, drawing, and early mornings. A child who should have grown up safe, protected by the adults around her. Instead, she became the victim of one of Missouri's darkest crimes. A crime that shattered a town. A crime that tested investigators. A crime that exposed the hidden fractures within a community. A crime that forced everyone to confront the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, danger comes from the people you least expect. But through pain, something else survives. Legacy, memory, love, and the promise that Rowan will never be forgotten. If you found this documentary important, if you believe children deserve protection, and if you want more deep, investigative storytelling, please like, comment, and hit the subscribe button. It helps us bring cases like Rowan's back into the light, so they are never repeated, never ignored, and never forgotten. This has been Beyond the Case. Thank you for watching.